Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Somm TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's episode, I have one of my absolute favorites back on the podcast, Megan Zobak of M. Zobak Wines, winemaker and dear friend. Megan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jason. How are you?
I'm good. I got to finish this intro before we can talk, though.
Okay.
So on Somm TV right now, I want everyone to go there because we have the vintage report for what is shaping up to be one of the best vintages in Napa Valley in the last, say, 20 or so years. And I'm sure, Meg, you can talk about how well it went this year. But right now on Somm TV, you can see a number of great winemakers speak about how that vintage went through harvest, and now that everything's sort of in tanks, what they think it's going to be like. And if you're a collector or a drinker, this is a vintage to look out for in Napa. So go to sommtv.com. Whether you're a subscriber or not, you can watch that vintage report for free right now on Somm TV. So Megan, on today's pod, I wanted to have you on. We're going to talk about sort of the BS and the truth about what it's actually like to be a winemaker. Something I know. I love whenever you're on. You're always nervous about where we're going to go. And I love this.
What's he going to ask me?
Of course. I should intro you more. Your wines, M. Zobak Wines, you make a Gamay. You also make
Cabernet from Moss Vineyard. Yeah.
Yep. And I've never had the Cabernet, but I have had your Gamay, and it is absolutely one of the best. It was a revelatory wine. I thought
Thank
it was
you.
for sure. I did not think it was from California. I was completely stumped.
Nice.
I thought it was definitely a much different wine. So, but it's fantastic. And you also are the winemaker over at Burgess Wine Cellars.
That is
Burgess
right.
Cellars.
Yep.
In Napa. So really quick, how was this vintage 2024?
It was a good one. I thought it was going to be another cold vintage like last year, and it actually ended up being pretty classic. So yeah, there were really, I always hate to talk about harvest before it's done. But yeah, we really didn't have any issues, which was awesome.
That's good. Well, we heard from a lot that it turned out to be quite a good vintage. You know, nothing really went wrong the wrong direction. Nothing went too right that direction. And so it was gonna be good.
Yeah.
Which brings me to winemaking. Now, you've been on the podcast to talk about how you got your start in NFL. You were obviously all over Somm TV. You've been in Sparklers. You were, tons of educational content. You were in Ghosts of Napa Valley. I think people are well acquainted with your personality and how funny you are. And I will say, if you have not seen Ghosts of Napa Valley, go to Somm TV and watch it because Meg is hysterical in this movie.
It was scary.
It was a scary process. So I was thinking kind of this idea of what people think it is to be a winemaker. You are not somebody you took an interesting path. You were working for the NFL and you decided, I want to be a winemaker. And I don't know if you read the book, The Secret, and created a vision board on Pinterest or whatever you did, but you followed that path and actually did it. Not just did it. You have your own brand and you work for a very hallowed, important estate up in Napa. What did you think being a winemaker was going to be like before you did this? Now you're not old, but you're an old hat at this. You've gone through several vintages. You know what you're doing. What did you think this job was going to be like?
Man, that's a good question. I knew that there was a lot of hard work involved. I don't think I realized how similar the schedule was going to be to the NFL, which is really funny to say out loud. But it's my only reference professionally. And there's really no off season. And I think that is kind of the myth that you have harvest and then basically the rest of the year is kind of you're frolicking through the vineyards. And I didn't think it was going to be exactly like that easy. But certainly I didn't realize how much of a myth the off season is.
What is the off? There has to be like a spring break for you guys. Like if you're going to go and take a week and take a vacation to go see family or something, when would you do that as a winemaker?
Yeah, I think most winemakers will try to line something up right after harvest just for sanity to see something different and take a break. Or you'll line something up in the summer, like early summer before harvest, before getting ready for harvest again. So actually, again, like kind of similar to the NFL, and maybe that's just because the seasons are the same, like the high season, so fall, essentially. But yeah, that's usually the time. It's also a bad time to visit wine regions because usually the winemakers are trying to get out of town. So yeah, early, I'd say winter or early summer are kind of the times.
You say it's hard work, but are we talking like physical work? Like this is actually you're lifting stuff, you're moving stuff, or are you talking about just like constant busy work? What I'm trying to get a paint a picture of like what your day, your year is like as a winemaker.
Totally. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Winemaking is always very physical,
Mhm.
unless you have the whole process automated, which I don't know many people that do. So you are finishing fermentations, so the malolactic fermentation, secondary fermentation, you're hoping those finish as it gets cold. You are blending, which requires, a ton of mental space, but also like pulling samples, tasting, all that kind of stuff. Bottling takes up a ton of time and is logistically a huge pain in the ass because you have to involve so many people in the process. I'd say bottling is maybe the least, preparing to bottle is maybe the least fun winemaking thing that we are all involved in. I wish people would buy wine in barrels.
I wish
It'd be
I'd
so
love to
much
buy
easier.
a
Oh,
barrel of
God,
wine. I mean,
please.
it seems like that would be
Someone
quite
can make that
expensive though.
happen. Yes, and heavy. I
Yeah.
don't know where people would store a barrel in
How
their
many
house.
how many bottles in a barrel?
There's 25 cases.
Okay.
So,
So then 25 times 12.
yes.
I mean that's very expensive. Even if we're talking cheap wine, that's still quite expensive
Yeah,
to buy that.
totally, totally. Yeah, and then you do a lot of travel for sales too. So it's just constant work. Some of it's physical. You start pruning in the vineyards. There's not really a time where there's nothing going on at a winery. Even if
Mhm.
you're a small winery, I'd say. I mean, unless you're really like super hands off and you're like, all right, I'm going to let the barrels do their thing and not top them or do anything for several months. But I mean, there's always something to do in the vineyard or the winery.
So, how much of your job is actually making wine? Like you're actually in the process of making wine. If I was to do a pie chart,
Oh
because I mean, you
man.
look, you uniquely, and the reason I wanted to talk to you about this is you have a smaller prestige brand that you have formed yourself. I
Yes.
assume like part of a dream you've always had. And
Yep.
then again, you work for a large company that has several different brands under the umbrella. So I'm sure that you're kind of pulled in different directions in that regard. You can speak like not many can, because
Yeah,
doing both of these must be two different parts of your brain and yet the same job. So how
totally.
much is actually winemaking on the pie chart?
I would say with my brand, there's a lot more of it because I'm not doing like sales trips as much with. I mean, I'm fortunate. A smaller brand, but the wine is sold out, so I don't have to do sales trips, which is awesome. I mean, it's also great to go and see like who's actually drinking the wine. That's always really fun. But with the bigger company, like winemaker appearances are more important. Like people actually meeting the winemaker, especially if they can't make it to Napa to come visit the winery. That's always important, connecting with the people who are drinking the wine. So there's a lot more involved that way. So I would say with my brand, it's probably 80% winemaking. And then the bane of my existence, shipping wine. Oh my God, horrible.
Yeah, yeah,
You
I
have to
know.
check everyone's weather. It's terrible. And then with Burgess, it's probably like 50. There's so many other things involved. And it's not a huge brand, but it's big enough that you have to do a lot of other stuff.
Of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I could only imagine. You have this idea, or at least I did before I truly got into this, of, winemaker working quietly with their staff and not having to. But then it turns out winemakers have to be like immensely people. You have to be an outward facing person.
Yes.
And I wonder what that's like because it's interesting. We'll take it back to the NFL. If a coach wins or loses a game and then they sit them down for a press conference, the coach doesn't really have to charm anybody. And in a lot of cases, like if you think about like Belichick or somebody, they're just an asshole. They don't like they just don't they don't care. Their job is like my job is to win and manage a team. But for you, you actually have to charm. You have to be on. And I wonder what's a harder part of your job, staying on when you seat somebody, because I imagine
Right.
people who buy your wine, that's the reason you're making wine. That's how you win, is it sells. So
Yeah.
what's harder? Is it harder to be a people person and be on all the time, or is it harder to make good wine?
I would say The hardest thing I think is to have to switch very quickly within the same day.
Hmm.
So like if I'm like this year I had such a fun harvest crew. A lot of people were everyone was new to Burgess. It was the largest crew I'd ever had and some people were new to the industry. So I'm in there like shoveling tanks, teaching them and suddenly I have to go like host a group and
Right.
like talk about wine and I've got like grapes coming out of my hair and like which is
Right.
also kind of fun. People actually really want to see that. Like they want their winemakers to be dirty. They don't want like a buttoned up, like whatever. So but the switching is really funny sometimes because I'll go from explaining how to, manage a fermentation to my interns to trying to explain, like how a sparkling wine is made to a customer or something like that within short order. So it's just a quick, which I think is also why Harvest gets to be so, I mean, it's a lot of mental gymnastics as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would say of the two, probably, and I guess it's just whatever you're into, but like probably being in front of a ton of people and talking about like just talking a lot. I think like I actually love being in the cellar and getting dirty and doing that portion. And I'm a people person, like I love people.
Mhm.
But I think the part that gets hard is like being on the road and doing like sales trips and like just the constant like there are people who are so talented at that. Like sales is such a talent, like such a I don't know, a unique talent. For me, sales is not necessarily my thing, but I can wax poetic about things I care about. So, making sure you're involved in projects that you actually love and care about, that's so much easier. I can tell stories. Sales for me, if I had to be like a used car salesman, I would be homeless. Like, there's no way
Right.
that I
Well,
would be
but I mean,
successful.
something I wanted to ask you next is wine's not used cars. I mean, like,
No,
look,
of course.
selling a used car. Here's the fascinating thing: if somebody walks on a car lot,
Yeah.
what do they say? They say they're there to buy a car. So if you don't sell them a car, you've done a bad job because they're there to buy a car. With
Yes,
wine, especially wine in Napa, there's a lot of choices.
this is
And
true.
so, how do you sell wine to somebody when standing next to you at the next table, or on the menu there's 50 other wines right next to you, or there's this winemaker standing right next to you from another winery?
Right,
How do you do that? How do you rise above? How is it that you can be successful with that much overlap? Because I mean, in Napa, you
right.
don't just go tasting at Burgess. I would go tasting at Burgess, and I would go tasting at Mondavi, and then I'd go
Sure.
tasting at Matthiasen, and then I would.
Yeah.
So, how do you stand out?
So, I mean, I think things that my team and I have built at Burgess that are unique are the farming, the promiscuous farming, the which always sounds so crazy, but it is an actual thing. Um,
Promiscuous farming is very. My mind is racing. I love it.
yes. I say it so naturally now, and everyone always giggles when I say it. And I remember that it sounds
Yeah,
crazy after I'm just so used to saying it now. But we've interplanted fruit trees within the vineyard, which is something that a
it's an open
guy.
marriage. It's
It's an
fine.
it's an open marriage. It's a very accepting. Yeah, the farming aspects, the animals, the ways that like I'm fermenting differently, like people just get really excited about it. I'm lucky that we have really talented individuals in our tasting room that are actually handling sales. I just come in and I tell people like what we're doing and what's different and get to know them. So I'm not actually trying to sell. I'm just trying to tell them about the place that they're in. So that's really nice that I don't come in with any pressure of like having to sell. And I think people connect with that, I hope, authenticity and
Sure.
just the story and everything like that. And then we just have this killer group of like basically two guys in our tasting room who are just like so cool and so smart and like so great at hospitality. And so it's just very welcoming. So that's really nice.
What does a sales trip look like for you? I mean, is it like just 24/7? What does it look like? So you go to Kansas City or something, or
Yeah.
wherever you would go. What
Yeah.
is what is this trip like for you?
So it depends on the trip. It depends on if you're going for like a big wine event or if you're going specifically to just go visit accounts. For us, we have a company called Domain Estates, which handles all of our outside sales, so outside of the winery. So they basically just line up like a huge agenda of people to visit. So, like key restaurants to connect with, somms to connect with, wine buyers. So you're just like going through, and I have to give credit to them. They do a lot of the sales work, and I show up and I just keep telling our story. So it's like me repeating myself basically all day long to a bunch of different folks and hoping that like by the end of the day, my words haven't been thrown into a blender because I forget. I'm like, did I say that to you or did I say that to the last person? I'm not sure. But fortunately, like wine people are so fun. So again, the salespeople have the harder job. I just come and I talk about, talk about the wines and the winemaking, and then they ask me a bunch of questions. And then mostly I try to, fortunately, there's a lot of cool people in the industry. They're fun to hang out
Yeah.
with. Like I love
Yeah,
hanging
I
out with
agree.
somms, especially when they're like excited about the wines. So then I just try to get to know them and keep in touch with them. And it's for me, it's like a fun way. I mean, the travel is a lot, the rushing around, the tasting, all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's a fun way to connect with people. And I usually stay in touch with most of these people too, which is really fun. It's just kind of like boom, boom, boom. And that's where it starts getting a little tired. I mean, like a guy that I work with was just on the road for a month straight, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's very conducive to having a family. Just be on the road for a month
Life in general. Yeah.
selling, hawking alcohol.
Yeah, let's do this.
I want to get back to the actual winemaking of it.
Sure.
So I find it fascinating. I've never heard of a winemaker getting fired for totally effing up a vintage. Like, it's like,
Ooh.
here's the thing. If we're going to use a sports analogy or like almost any other profession, there are examples where you lose and you get fired. Are you
Right.
familiar with a winemaker who just like the wine didn't go through Mallow and they're like, dude, you can't do your job. Adios. Because it doesn't seem like that happens. It seems like there's too many safeguards in place.
Right. I do know of two, and I'm not going to name names, but I do know of two. And there was definitely a disagreement between the owner and the winemaker as to why. But the stories for both of these people were that they messed up the wine. I know one of them personally, and I do not believe it was that person's fault. And then the other person too, I don't think it was their fault either. But there are only very few examples of it. It
Are you talking
rarely
about the
happens.
are you talking about the Prisoner Wine Company? Is that what we're talking about right
No, I'm not naming any names of anyone anywhere.
now?
Um, Jeez.
So what did they mess up? Like how do you mess up wine so bad that you get fired?
I know one got really bad VA, but that's
Okay.
not necessarily, yeah,
Volatile
there's
acidity
like,
for you non-winemakers
yes,
there. I don't know.
sorry,
Yeah.
yes,
No,
yes.
you're fine.
Basically turned into vinegar.
Ah, okay.
And then the other person, there was some disagreement, I think, with, yeah, I can't remember the exact details around that one, but there are only two examples that I know of in the entire history, and it's debatable in the entire history of everything I know in
History
the
of
Napa
the of
Valley.
right. You're like in
um,
1247 in Germany, there was a guy.
yeah, in the entire history of winemaking. But yeah, and I think it's debatable on whether it was just like an actual disagreement with the owner and the winemaker, or if it was that the winemaker actually messed it up. And one of the winemakers I know very well, who's incredibly talented, so I just don't think that that is the case. I think it was more of a weird interpersonal thing. But yeah, it's not likely to happen. I mean, I guess if you were to eventually bottle and it was really crappy and it wasn't due to the vintage, like it being
Mhm.
weird vintage or something, you could probably
I
be
I do have
pushed out.
I know you've reminded me of a story. I actually do know that I can't say names because it would be
Yep.
awful.
No.
All I will say this, that it was a co-ferment with another fruit outside of
Oh
grapes, and
no.
this did
Okay.
not work,
Not
and
on
it was a
purpose.
lot of
Oh.
and that did happen, and I'll leave it there. Some people know exactly who I'm talking about, and others will not, so I'll leave it there. This is a question. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. Remember, it's just us here. Where you have had a vintage that you privately in your brain, you're like, oh my God, this, I might be effed. Like this may not work. And you're able to get it back on the rails and everything's fine. and you can talk about it now. Has that ever happened where you're like, because I mean, I'll tell you, I've been on set just to give
Yeah.
you, I've been on set. I was in Armenia. And for the first 2 days in Armenia filming what became Cup of Salvation, I was like, there is no movie. I do not have a film. This is the dumbest idea I've ever had. I have to evac. And like, I was basically ready to like
Oh,
go to
that
the
movie
American
was so
consulate.
great. I
And
can't believe you were
no,
ever to
but
the point where you thought
oh,
that's
look,
crazy.
look, I'm just telling you. And I think making a film is similar to a vintage because it happens over time. You have to pivot a lot. You have to
Yeah.
make adjustments and I don't know. I've never made wine, but your ego is constantly put in check making a film. Yeah. Everything you think,
Yeah.
you're like, nope, I'm doing it this way. In comes a boxing glove to punch you right in the face and
Oh
go,
yeah.
listen, little man, you don't know what you're doing. Even though
That's
you've made 8 films, 9 films, this is that you haven't made this one. And so I
yeah.
wonder if you've ever been in a position like that, if you can honestly tell me when you've tried to make a vintage and you were at night underneath the sheets going, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like,
First of all, the beginning of every harvest feels that way. Like you're like, oh, I know nothing. It doesn't matter how many harvests I have under my belt. Like I now know nothing. I was at a dinner the other night with a bunch of winemakers, and they were like, the greatest thing about making wine is every year you know nothing. Like, well, it's so true.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, whew, the fire years are tough, obviously. Like
sure.
2017 was like, I mean, mostly the winery that I was working for several wineries at the time, but where I was working, most of the fruit was already in. But it was
Hmm.
like, oh hell, what do we do with the rest of this if it has smoke taint? Like we can't make it, you know? And so,
Hmm.
but then you're just sitting there like waiting for like test results and like all these different things. And you're like, oh God. And is there anything that I can do to make it not, appear in the wine? And, so that kind of is a little bit of a mind game. 2022 was turned out to be great, but during harvest was a shit show because of the heat spikes and trying to beat the heat spikes basically to
Hmm.
get the fruit in. So it was like a harvest that may normally take 2 months took 2 weeks, and just the absolute like madness of that and the logistics and the stress and just not, like not being able to literally go to bed because you're just working. That was nuts. And just not knowing if you had enough tank space to actually process, having more fruit than you could like process in a day, the whole thing, but having to pick it rather than it was like a series of, whereas 2023, you had all the time in the world to make decisions because it was a slow, cool harvest. Like the fruit ripeness stayed steady for what felt like forever. Like it didn't, nothing was running away on you. 2022 was like, you better be making good decisions because you only have like this much time to make them. Like it was like a 2 month harvest truncated to 2 weeks is
Right.
intense,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and you're
But
just double
you never felt
guessing.
like you were going to lose that vintage. You just felt like it
Not
wasn't going to possibly be the level of quality you wanted, right?
not lose it, for sure not lose it. And I've never been afraid that I was going to actually lose a vintage, but that one was like, I hope that I am making the right decision. And I won't know if I've made the right decisions until after fermentation, really, like when stuff starts aging. And that is anxiety inducing for sure. And it
Yeah.
ended up being great, but I think a lot of winemakers were worried about it just because it was so intense and quick and your decision making had to be so fast. Yeah, that was nutso.
It's a terrifying thought. I mean, I do know like places like Chateau de Yquem where they will literally, if something's wrong, they'll just declare, nope, we're not making wine this year, which is just a
Wow.
staggering thing. It's happened many times.
Yeah.
And, there's an episode on Sound TV, we filmed their harvest, which is a amazing thing to watch happen because for them, it happens
So
over
cool.
time because of the botrytis and they're trying to pick the right grapes and
Right.
leave ones to hang longer so that the noble rot takes shape and all this. But there are years where they don't get enough botrytis or X or Y and they just literally do not do a wine. I'm sure they probably pick it and sell the wine for bulk or something, but
Sure.
they don't make you come. And I
Yeah.
wonder, like Napa, you can't do that. Like you don't have. If you guys were to lose an entire vintage at Burgess, it would be, you'd have to
I
lay
mean,
off your
we
staff probably. I mean, it'd
we
be
lost 2020. We didn't have I mean, the only thing I made in 2020 was the sparkling wine because of the fires.
Oh, right, because you got it in.
Yeah. So which was crazy because we had just
You didn't
purchased.
even make. It's crazy to me to think that. I mean, I guess it would be for insurance reasons. You can't make wine, right? You probably have a claim. I don't know. This
Yeah,
is something I'm worried about getting into this topic, but it's surprising people didn't just make a tank just to see how the smoke tank
totally.
would play out.
So no, we because of 2017, we also have now experience with with smoke tainted wine where we didn't have as much experience before.
Hmm.
I mean, we've been fortunate because we haven't had a fire year since 2020, but I should knock on wood.
Yeah,
Um, but it was like it was in the vineyard. It wasn't near the vineyard. Like it was everywhere,
yeah.
you know.
It
So
literally burned vines.
it was
You're
so
saying, yeah,
intense. Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, we were fortunate. Our vineyards ended up being fine, but the winery burned down. The winery buildings burned down. So, like, we were so close to it. We actually, so the entire valley kind of did this. We all picked and did mini fermentations to see. So, we had like a sea of brutes, which is basically like 10-gallon brutes, which is basically, it looks like it's a food grade trash can essentially. So
Okay,
we had seas of these brutes with mini fermentations from like different areas in the vineyard just to see how it would ferment and if you could taste it, and then test you because you can test for smoke taint. So test for the markers of smoke taint, and it was like off the charts. Like there's no
yeah,
way. Like, and when you taste a heavily smoke tainted wine, it literally tastes like you're licking an ashtray. It is like
yeah. I have had
repulsive.
one. Yeah,
And then you just kind of wonder about like what's in it, and so you don't, it's that part gets hard. But and some people weren't, I mean, some people were fine in 2020. Like I know a few people that have made wines that I'm like, ooh, this is a ballsy move, but they're people I trust, and so I'm like, I'm going to try it, and they were fine. And so I'm
hmm,
most likely they picked before the fire, or very quickly, soon enough that smoke taint didn't settle in. But or the smoke didn't settle in. But yeah, a lot of people unfortunately had to skip 2020. And the people that put out good wine,
yeah,
that
yeah,
were
yeah. Of
able to make
course.
some wine.
I know the Mathiasons did. You know, I talk about
Yeah,
Steve a lot. They're good friends of the podcast and the films and everything. And they did. And Steve was, I think, pretty bullheaded about I'm going to make wine this year and I'll
yeah,
deal with it. And
yeah,
their wines are good. I think they were far enough away. I think that
totally.
maybe the smoke taint just didn't hit, but they do source from all over the place.
They
So,
do.
anyways, so now obviously we've run the gamut of all of the different things that you have to deal with and pivot.
Yeah.
How do you feel about your chosen profession now? Are you satisfied? Are you happy that this is what you chose
Oh,
to
I
do?
love it. I love it. It is, there's nothing else I would want to do. Yeah. Someone
Nothing?
at,
Really?
uh, no, I always want to make wine. I mean, maybe something else in addition to.
Okay. All right. Okay, fair.
Like
Fair.
lots of travel. But no, I love making wine, and it's harvest is so crazy, and it like every year our intern crew is usually like, wow, I didn't know it was going to be this hard, but they also love it, and it's so fun and refreshing, and you get to teach and travel and be out in the vineyard, and I mean meet cool people, like you, Jason, and
Yeah, so cool.
but it's yeah, God, I love winemaking. I really love winemaking.
Meg, it's great to have somebody so positive. You know, I'm
Thanks.
becoming like this grumpy curmudgeon myself, and I'm like here's a good example. Like Beaujolais Nouveau just hit the stores, and I'm just like all pissed about it. I hate that stuff, and I'm like walking around the grocery store like, why would you buy this for $15 when you could buy anything else for $15? It's so much better. And
Oh my
but
God.
you have such a good perspective on things, which
Thank
is
you.
why I want to ask you. I don't know when people are listening to this, but Thanksgiving is a couple days away.
Ah, yes.
You as a great drinker and a winemaker, what are you going to drink?
I mean,
What should we have on our Thanksgiving table?
Gamay, duh. Hello.
I knew you were going to say that.
I was like, I'm gonna say something really predictable. No, but Gamay is great for, I mean, obviously great for Thanksgiving. I think sparkling wine's fantastic for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It depends on what you're making. I love an untraditional Thanksgiving meal with friends. I mean, well, wow. Sorry, family. I love Friendsgiving.
Friendsgiving. Well, the family Thanksgiving thing is a bit, it
So
can
much
be
pressure.
it's kind of like your sales trips for me.
Yeah, but your salespeople are grouchy.
I mean,
Just kidding. I'm throwing
how
so much
dare
shade.
you?
I
How
love
dare
my
you say
family.
that about my wife's parents? How dare you? All right. So all right, give me a non-traditional wine then. If you're gonna go non-traditional
Ooh,
food, which I never get
non-traditional.
to do, I always have to have turkey and all the standard stuff, but non-traditional wine. I
Hmm.
mean, Gamay at this point, for people listening to the podcast,
It's predictable.
Beaujolais is not. I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't call it exotic. I mean,
Sure.
I would
Fine.
say most people have probably at least had like Beaujolais Village or something like that
Totally.
on the regular. So, what?
Um,
Let's go non-traditional.
okay, so this year, and I don't have the menu totally planned out yet, but this year with friends, we're doing an Asian themed food
Okay.
menu. So maybe something fun like even chocolate or
Really?
your eyes. I
Okay,
mean,
that's
why
what I was.
not? I
That
mean,
sounds
like
good.
something fun. Yeah,
Can
something
you
fun and
explain to people what
refreshing.
that is? Because most people don't know what. I mean,
I mean, it's so it can be slightly fizzy sometimes, depending on the producer. It's like I would say like a lighter, bright white wine. Really fun to drink. I always think of it as fun. It's like really fun to drink. It's like happy, light, like not a super alcoholic wine.
mhm.
Um, or some kind of like textural white wine, like maybe a Sicilian white wine, or I
Oh,
don't know.
nice.
Yeah, right? Like, I don't know, something fun with a little texture and maybe a little salinity. Now I feel like I'm getting into Burgundy and it's going to be predictable. But I mean, champagne is always great or some kind of sparkling wine. Um, Cariccioli or Andy Lytle, his stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
one of
Andy
those if you're
Lytle's
going,
Lytle Barnett is quite good.
yes, if you're
Yeah.
doing like domestic sparkling. Yeah, there's so many fun things to drink. I mean, it's a drinking holiday, drinking and eating holiday, let's be honest.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, generally because of the company, you have to drink. Um, my, I mean, anyone who's going to be
It's
around me
the
has
only
to
way to
drink.
get
But
through it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. You know what?
Your
You know what I did?
grandma.
Actually, speaking of Matthiasen, I got a ton of their rosé, which I love, and I'm always
Oh,
talking about how
yeah.
much I love it. I think it's my
So
favorite
great.
American rosé, and a bunch of their cab and a bunch of their. They make a Vermentino. Steve Matthiasen
Yes.
and Jill, they make a Vermentino that is so affordable and so
Yes.
damn good.
It's
It's
very
become like
good.
one of my favorites. Where I think we have like 4 or 5 bottles of that for Thanksgiving.
Oh, I love that.
That's my pick. It's like I'm always like plugging Matthiasen, but I really do love these guys. They make great wine.
Oh, I love Steve and
So,
Jill. They're fantastic. Their whole
yeah,
team
they're
is
the
great.
best. Well,
Is
yeah,
that
I
a
mean,
post meal drink? Or is
no, that's
that
probably pre and during
okay?
white
Got it.
wine. The
Like it.
red, there's nothing I can do. My father-in-law likes, we'll probably have cab, whether I like it or not. It'll be, it is what it is. So yeah, well, this is good, Meg, and I really appreciate you coming on. This it means a lot. You can see Meg and hear Meg all over Som TV. Watch Ghost in Napa Valley. Watch Sparklers. Watch any of the other million drink of bottles you've done. We love having you on. It means a lot.
Aw. Thank you. It's always good to see you.
And obviously, if you have Som TV, whether you're a subscriber or not, download the app and you can watch the 2024 Vintage Report right now on somtv.com or any of our apps. I want to say thanks, Meg, and say thanks to our producer, John Adams. Everybody have a good Thanksgiving, drink something wonderful, and be nice to your family. Talk soon.